In a peaceful little town where everyone knew each other by name, there lived an elderly man named Walter. His house stood at the corner of Maple Street with its white picket fence and neatly trimmed hedges. Every afternoon, without fail, Walter would sit on his porch in a worn but sturdy wooden chair. He wore the same outfit every day, a faded blue shirt, khaki pants, and a cap that proudly displayed the Marine Corps emblem. To the people who passed by, Walter was a quiet figure, often lost in thought as he gazed down the street. Walter wasn't just any old man. He was a hero from another time. At 92 years old, he still carried himself with dignity, though age had slowed him down. Decades ago, he had served his country during World War II, risking his life for freedoms most people took for granted today. Now he spent his days watching the world change around him, content to live a simple life. But lately, something new had disrupted the calm rhythm of his afternoons. A group of teenagers who had started hanging out near his house. At first, they seemed harmless enough. They laughed loudly, shared snacks, and occasionally skateboarded down the sidewalk. Walter didn't mind them too much. In fact, he enjoyed hearing their energy, even if it reminded him how different things were now compared to when he was young. But over time, their behavior began to shift. The laughter turned into jeers, and the harmless chatter became mocking comments directed at Walter. Some of them called him names like Grandpa Grouch, or made fun of his slow movements when he adjusted his chair or reached for his cane. One particular boy, Jake, seemed to take the lead in teasing Walter. He was tall for his age, with shaggy hair and a cocky grin that never seemed to fade. Jake often encouraged the others to join in, tossing crumpled soda cans onto Walter's lawn or kicking dirt toward his flower beds. Walter tried not to let it bother him. After all, he had faced far worse in his lifetime: enemy fire, freezing winters in foreign lands, and the loss of friends he could never forget. Still, the disrespect stung more than he cared to admit. Each day, Walter sat silently on his porch, pretending not to hear their taunts. Sometimes he'd adjust his cap, a small act of defiance that said, "I'm still here." Other times he'd glance at the American flag standing proudly beside his chair. It was a reminder of everything he had fought for, the values of respect, honor, and unity. Yet here he was, sitting alone while a group of kids showed no regard for those principles. Their actions weren't just disrespectful to him. They felt like a slap in the face to the nation he had once defended. Despite the growing tension, Walter refused to confront them directly. He believed in patience and hoped that maybe, just maybe, they would grow tired of their antics and leave him be. But deep inside, he couldn't help feeling disheartened. Memories of his youth flooded back, the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers, the pride of wearing his uniform, and the sacrifices he and his comrades had made. All of that felt distant now, overshadowed by the apathy of these young strangers. Undine. One particularly warm afternoon, Walter decided to bring out a photo album he kept stored inside. Filled with black and white pictures of his days in the military, it was a treasure trove of memories. As he flipped through the pages, he paused at a picture of himself as a young man standing alongside his unit. They looked so full of hope and determination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Walter sighed, closing the book gently. Those days were long gone, but the lessons he learned then stayed with him forever. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting golden light across the neighborhood, Walter leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the rustling leaves. For a brief second, he allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like if someone stood up for him, for the ideals he represented. Little did he know, that wish was about to come true, in ways he could never have anticipated. The next day brought no relief for Walter. The group of teenagers returned, louder and more unruly than before. This time, they didn't just stick to their usual teasing. They began throwing empty chip bags and candy wrappers onto Walter's lawn. One boy even kicked over a small potted plant that Walter had carefully nurtured for months. The sound of the ceramic pot shattering against the ground made Walter flinch, but he remained seated, gripping his cane tightly. He told himself to stay calm, to rise above their behavior, but it was getting harder with each passing moment. Jake, the ringleader, noticed Walter's reaction and smirked. "Hey, Grandpa," he called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "You need help cleaning up? Or are you too old for that now?" His friends burst into laughter, egging him on. Walter didn't respond. Instead, he looked down at the flag beside his chair, its red and white stripes fluttering gently in the breeze. It was one of the few things he had left from his days in the service, a reminder of the country he loved and the sacrifices he had made. Seeing it there gave him strength, even as the teens continued their cruel game. Things escalated quickly when Jake spotted the flag. With a mischievous grin, he walked over and grabbed it. "What's this, your favorite blanket?" he sneered, holding it up like a trophy. The other teens laughed again, clapping and cheering him on. Walter's heart sank. He had carried that flag through battles, protected it during the darkest moments of his life, and now it was being treated like a joke. Slowly, he rose from his chair, leaning heavily on his cane. His movements were deliberate, commanding attention despite his frailty. "That flag means something," Walter said, his voice steady but soft. For a moment, the teens stopped laughing and turned to look at him. But Jake quickly recovered, waving the flag around like a toy. "Yeah, sure it does," he replied sarcastically. "It means you're ancient." His words were met with more snickers from the group. Walter took a step forward, his eyes locked on Jake. There was no anger in his gaze, only sadness. "You don't understand what it stands for," he added quietly. "But maybe someday you will." Despite his efforts, the teens weren't interested in listening. They resumed their antics, tossing the flag back and forth while Walter stood helplessly watching. Finally, exhausted and humiliated, he lowered himself back into his chair. He adjusted his cap, pulling it down slightly to shield his face. Inside, he felt a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, and a deep sense of loss. How could these kids not see the importance of what they were mocking? Didn't they realize how much he had given for them to have the freedom to laugh and play without fear? Unbeknownst to Walter, someone else had been watching the entire scene unfold. Mrs. Thompson, a kind-hearted neighbor who lived 2 houses down, had been watering her flowers when she noticed the commotion. She had always admired Walter from afar, respecting his quiet dignity and the stories she'd heard about his service. Watching the teenagers treat him so poorly filled her with outrage. As she stood on her porch, hose in hand, she debated what to do. Should she confront them herself, or should she call someone who could handle the situation better? Mrs. Thompson decided to act. She went inside, picked up her phone, and dialed her son's number. Her son, James Carter, was a Marine stationed at a base not far from town. Though he visited rarely due to his demanding schedule, he and his mother were close. When she explained what was happening, James listened intently, his jaw tightening with every word. "Mom, I'll be there as soon as I can," he said firmly. Without wasting another second, he contacted a few of his fellow Marines and arranged to meet them nearby. Within an hour, a black SUV pulled up to the curb in front of Walter's house. Out stepped Sergeant James Carter and 3 other Marines, all dressed in full uniform. Their polished boots clicked against the pavement as they approached the scene. The transformation was immediate. The once rowdy teenagers froze mid-laugh, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion. Jake dropped the flag he had been holding, letting it fall silently to the ground. For the first time that day, the street was completely silent. James led the group toward Walter's porch, his posture tall and commanding. When he reached the steps, he stopped and saluted Walter with precision. "Sir," he said respectfully, his voice clear and strong. "We heard about what happened here today." Walter looked up, startled by the sight of the uniformed men standing before him. He blinked a few times, unsure if he was dreaming. Then, slowly, a faint smile spread across his face. Someone had finally noticed. Someone cared. As the other Marines fanned out around the group of teens, their presence alone was enough to command respect. James turned to address the teenagers, his tone firm but measured. "Do you know why we wear this uniform?" he asked, gesturing to himself and his comrades. No one answered. The teens shifted uncomfortably, some looking at the ground while others glanced nervously at each other. "We wear it to honor people like Mr. Walter here," James continued. "Men and women who sacrificed everything so you could live free lives. And yet here you are treating him and the flag with disrespect." His words hung heavy in the air, forcing the teens to confront the reality of their actions. One boy shuffled his feet awkwardly, while another whispered something to his friend. Jake, however, stood frozen, his earlier bravado replaced by guilt. James wasn't done yet. He went on to explain the values of honor, duty, and respect, emphasizing how important it was to recognize those who came before them. By the time he finished speaking, the teens looked visibly shaken, their earlier arrogance gone. For Walter, the moment was bittersweet. Part of him wished it hadn't come to this, that the teens could have shown respect without needing intervention. But another part of him felt grateful that someone had taken the time to teach these kids a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. As he sat there surrounded by the Marines, he realized that maybe there was still hope for the younger generation after all. The silence on the street was deafening. The teenagers stood frozen, their eyes darting between the Marines and Walter. For the first time, they seemed to realize the gravity of what they had done. Jake, who had been so bold just moments earlier, now looked uneasy, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He glanced at the flag lying crumpled on the ground and then back at Walter, whose calm but piercing gaze held a mix of sadness and quiet strength. Sergeant James Carter didn't raise his voice, but his words carried weight. "Do you know what this flag represents?" he asked, pointing to the discarded symbol of freedom. No one answered. The teens shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. James bent down, picked up the flag, and carefully smoothed out its wrinkles. "This isn't just a piece of cloth," he continued, holding it up for everyone to see. "It stands for courage, sacrifice, and unity. It's something people like Mr. Walter fought for, something they gave up years of their lives to protect." He turned to face the group again, his expression firm but not unkind. "When you disrespect this flag, you're disrespecting everything it stands for, and everyone who served under it." His words struck a nerve. Some of the teens began to shuffle their feet nervously, while others stared at the ground, unable to meet his gaze. One boy muttered an apology under his breath, though it was too soft for anyone to hear clearly. James nodded slowly, acknowledging the small step. Then, he gestured toward Walter, who still sat quietly on his porch. "Mr. Walter is a veteran of World War II. Do you know what that means? It means he left behind everything he knew to fight for your freedom. He faced danger, loss, and hardship, all so you could live in peace." As he spoke, James moved closer. To the teens, his presence both intimidating and commanding. And how do you repay him? By mocking him? By treating him like he doesn't matter? The question hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Jake swallowed hard, his usual confidence replaced by shame. He took a hesitant step forward, reaching out to take the flag from James. "I'm sorry, sir," he mumbled, looking directly at Walter for the first time. His voice trembled slightly, but his apology felt genuine. Walter studied him for a moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, he accepted the flag back, cradling it gently in his arms. Encouraged by Jake's apology, another teen stepped forward. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Mr. Walter," she said softly, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "We were just messing around, but we didn't think about how it would make you feel." Her words broke the tension, prompting others to follow suit. One by one, the teenagers offered their apologies, each more heartfelt than the last. Walter listened silently, his expression softening as he absorbed their words. By the time the last apology was spoken, the atmosphere on the street had shifted entirely. Gone was the arrogance and carelessness that had defined the teens' behavior. Earlier, in its place was a sense of accountability, a recognition of the impact their actions had on someone else. James watched the scene unfold with satisfaction, knowing that this moment would stay with them long after he and his fellow Marines left. As the apologies concluded, James addressed the group one final time. "Apologizing is a good start," he said, "but actions speak louder than words. If you truly want to show respect, prove it. Help Mr. Walter with his yard work. Visit him and learn about his experiences. Show him that you value what he did for this country." The teens nodded, eager to make amends. Jake even volunteered to clean up the mess they had made, picking up trash and retrieving the broken pieces of Walter's potted plant. Walter watched all of this with a mixture of emotions. He felt relief that the confrontation had ended peacefully, gratitude for James and the Marines' intervention, and hope for the future. These kids weren't bad. They were simply misguided. With guidance and understanding, they could grow into responsible, compassionate adults. As the teens worked together to tidy up his yard, Walter couldn't help but smile. It wasn't the outcome he had expected, but it was far better than anything he could have hoped for. When the cleanup was finished, James approached Walter once more. "Sir, I'm glad we could be here today," he said sincerely. "But remember, you're never alone. There are people who care deeply about honoring veterans like you." Walter shook his hand firmly, his grip surprisingly strong for a man of his age. "Thank you, son," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done more than you know." With that, James and the Marines returned to their vehicle, leaving behind a neighborhood forever changed by their visit. The teens lingered for a while longer, chatting awkwardly with Walter and asking questions about his time in the military. Though hesitant at first, Walter opened up, sharing stories of camaraderie, bravery, and sacrifice. The teens listened intently, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity and admiration. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Walter sat back in his chair, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the day had reminded him that even in a world that often seemed indifferent, there were still people willing to stand up for what was right. And perhaps, just perhaps, the next generation wasn't as lost as he had feared. The days that followed the Marines' visit brought a noticeable change to Maple Street. The once rowdy group of teenagers began showing up at Walter's house, not to mock him, but to help. At first, their visits were awkward and hesitant. Jake and his friends would knock on Walter's door, shuffling their feet nervously as they offered to mow his lawn or sweep his porch. Walter welcomed them warmly, always inviting them to sit for a while after they finished their chores. Slowly, these brief encounters turned into longer conversations, with the teens asking more questions about his life and experiences. Walter found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. He told them stories from his time in the war, how cold it got during winter campaigns, how scared he was when enemy fire came too close, and how proud he felt standing alongside his fellow soldiers. The teens listened intently, their eyes wide with fascination. They had never heard such first-hand accounts before, and Walter's tales gave them a glimpse into history books they had only skimmed through in school. Each story carried a lesson about teamwork, resilience, and the importance of standing up for what is right. One afternoon, as the teens gathered around Walter on his porch, Jake asked a question that surprised everyone. "Mr. Walter," he began hesitantly, "why did you join the Marines? Weren't you scared?" Walter chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "Of course I was scared," he admitted. "But sometimes fear doesn't mean you shouldn't do something. It means you have to. I joined because I believed in protecting others, even if it meant risking my own life." His answer left the group silent, each teen reflecting on the courage it must have taken to make such a choice. As the weeks went by, the bond between Walter and the teens grew stronger. They started bringing small gifts, a potted plant to replace the one they had broken, cookies baked by one of their mothers, or handmade cards expressing gratitude. Walter accepted these gestures graciously, often thanking them with a smile and a pat on the shoulder. In return, he shared more of his memories, teaching them lessons that extended beyond the battlefield. He spoke about the value of hard work, the importance of respecting elders, and the power of forgiveness. The transformation wasn't just limited to the teens, it spread throughout the neighborhood. Neighbors who had previously ignored Walter now stopped by to chat, inspired by the changes they saw. Mrs. Thompson, whose call had sparked the Marines' intervention, became a regular visitor, often bringing fresh flowers or homemade pies. Even strangers passing through the street would wave or tip their hats to Walter, acknowledging him not just as an elderly man, but as a hero worthy of respect. For Walter, this newfound connection filled a void he hadn't realized existed. For years he had lived quietly, content in his solitude but occasionally yearning for companionship. Now he had a group of young people eager to learn from him, treating him with the dignity he deserved. Their energy reminded him of his own youth, rekindling a spark of joy he thought had faded long ago. He even started taking short walks around the block, accompanied by Jake or another teen, enjoying the fresh air and lively chatter. One Saturday morning, the teens decided to organize a special surprise for Walter. With permission from Mrs. Thompson, they cleaned up her backyard and set up a small picnic area. They invited Walter over, presenting him with a banner that read, "Thank you, Mr. Walter," in bold letters. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to him. As he sat surrounded by smiling faces, sharing laughter and stories, Walter felt a profound sense of belonging. These kids, who had once disrespected him, had become like family. During the picnic, one of the girls asked Walter if he ever missed being in the service. He thought for a moment before answering. "There are parts I miss, the friendships, the sense of purpose, but I also know my job was to create a better future for all of you. And seeing you here, learning and growing, makes me believe I did my part well." His words moved the group, prompting several of them to promise they would carry forward the values he had taught them. Jake, in particular, seemed deeply affected by Walter's influence. Once the ringleader of mischief, he now took on a leadership role within the group, encouraging others to volunteer in the community and treat people with kindness. He confided in Walter one evening, admitting that meeting him had changed his perspective on life. "I used to think old people didn't matter much," Jake said honestly, "but now I see how wrong I was. You've done so much for us even though we didn't deserve it." Walter placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, his expression soft but firm. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he replied. "What matters is what you do with it." Those words stuck with Jake, guiding him as he worked to prove himself not just to Walter, but to the entire neighborhood. By the end of the summer, Maple Street had transformed into a tighter-knit community than ever before. The teens continued visiting Walter regularly, helping him with tasks and soaking up his wisdom. Other residents followed their example, reaching out to seniors in the area and organizing events to bring everyone together. Walter's porch, once a solitary retreat, became a gathering spot where laughter and conversation flowed freely. Through it all, Walter remained humble, never seeking recognition for the impact he had made. Yet those around him knew better. He had shown them the power of patience, understanding, and forgiveness. More importantly, he had bridged the gap between generations, proving that mutual respect could overcome even the deepest divides. As autumn approached, painting the trees in shades of gold and red, Walter sat on his porch watching the world go by. This time, however, he wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of life on Maple Street. The crisp air of autumn brought a new energy to the neighborhood, with leaves crunching underfoot and the scent of wood smoke lingering in the breeze. Walter's porch remained the heart of the community, a place where people gathered to share stories, laughter, and moments of reflection. But now it wasn't just the teens who stopped by. Neighbors of all ages began joining in, drawn by the warmth and wisdom Walter offered. One chilly October afternoon, Jake arrived at Walter's house carrying a small box wrapped in brown paper. "Hey, Mr. Walter," he said, handing it over with a sheepish grin. "This is for you." Walter raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Carefully unwrapping the gift, he found a framed photograph inside. It was a picture of the teens standing proudly beside him, taken during the picnic they had organized weeks earlier. Beneath the photo, someone had written in neat letters, "To our hero, thank you for teaching us what truly matters." Walter stared at it for a long moment, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. This means more to me than you'll ever know, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. The gesture touched not only Walter but also the rest of the neighborhood. Inspired by the teen's efforts, other residents started finding ways to honor veterans like Walter. Mrs. Thompson coordinated a community event at the local park, inviting families to celebrate those who had served their country. She reached out to James, the Marine sergeant, who agreed to speak at the gathering. On the day of the event, rows of chairs were set up beneath the golden autumn trees, and a stage was decorated with American flags. Walter was given a seat of honor at the front, surrounded by neighbors and friends. When James took the microphone, the crowd fell silent. He spoke passionately about the sacrifices made by men and women in uniform, emphasizing how vital it was to remember and respect their contributions. People like Mr. Walter are living reminders of the values we hold dear, he said, gesturing toward Walter. Courage, duty, and selflessness. They paved the way for us to live freely and safely. Let's never take that for granted. His words resonated deeply, prompting applause and cheers from the audience. After James finished speaking, Walter was invited to say a few words. At first he hesitated, unused to being the center of attention. But as he looked out at the sea of familiar faces, he felt a surge of gratitude. I didn't fight for recognition or praise, he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. I fought because I believed in something bigger than myself. And today, seeing all of you here, I realize my work wasn't in vain. You remind me that kindness and understanding can bridge any gap, no matter how wide. His speech was met with thunderous applause, leaving many in the crowd wiping away tears. For Walter, it was a moment of validation, a reminder that his sacrifices had not been forgotten. As the event continued, children ran around playing games while adults shared food and conversation. The atmosphere was filled with joy and unity, a stark contrast to the tension that had once gripped the street. In the weeks that followed, the spirit of gratitude spread even further. Local schools began inviting Walter to speak to students about his experiences. Though initially reluctant, he agreed, knowing it was an opportunity to pass on important lessons to younger generations. Standing before classrooms full of curious faces, Walter recounted tales of camaraderie and perseverance, always ending with a message of hope. No matter what challenges you face, and he would tell them, remember that you're stronger together. Respect one another, support one another, and never stop learning. The impact of his visits was profound. Teachers reported that students were more engaged and thoughtful after hearing Walter's stories. Some even wrote essays or created art projects inspired by his words. One girl, barely 10 years old, presented Walter with a drawing of soldiers standing beneath an American flag. "Thank you for protecting us," she wrote at the bottom. Walter hung the picture on his wall, adding it to a growing collection of mementos that reminded him of the connections he had forged. Back on Maple Street, the bond between Walter and the teens continued to flourish. They often accompanied him on errands, helping him carry groceries or navigate uneven sidewalks. On weekends, they played board games or watched old war movies together, laughing at the outdated special effects but marveling at the bravery portrayed on screen. Each interaction deepened their understanding of the man behind the veteran, a gentle soul with a sharp mind and a kind heart. Jake, in particular, grew closer to Walter, treating him almost like a grandfather figure. He confided in him about school struggles, family issues, and dreams for the future. In turn, Walter offered advice rooted in patience and experience. "Life won't always be easy," he told Jake one evening as they sat side by side on the porch. "But every challenge is a chance to grow. Just keep moving forward and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it." Jake nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the wisdom. As Thanksgiving approached, the neighborhood came together once again. This time, it was to host a potluck dinner at the community center. Tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes: roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, all contributed by grateful residents. Walter was seated at the head table, surrounded by those who had come to cherish him. When it was his turn to speak, he simply smiled and said, "Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to belong." By December, the transformation on Maple Street was undeniable. What had once been a fractured community was now united by shared values and mutual respect. Lights twinkled in windows, wreaths adorned doors, and carolers sang cheerful songs as snow dusted the rooftops. Walter's porch, though quieter now due to the cold weather, remained a symbol of connection, a testament to the power of compassion and forgiveness. On Christmas Eve, the teens surprised Walter with one final gift. They stood outside his house, holding candles and singing Silent Night in harmony. Their voices carried through the frosty air, filling the night with warmth and love. Walter stepped onto his porch, tears streaming down his cheeks as he listened. When the song ended, Jake stepped forward and handed him a card signed by everyone. Inside it read, "Merry Christmas, Mr. Walter. You've shown us the true meaning of giving. We'll never forget you." As Walter closed the door that night, he felt a profound sense of peace. The loneliness that had once shadowed his days was gone, replaced by friendships that had grown stronger with time. He realized that while he had spent decades honoring others through his service, he had unknowingly earned the same respect in return. And in doing so, he had bridged gaps, healed wounds, and proven that it's never too late to make a difference. Winter settled over Maple Street, wrapping the neighborhood in a quiet stillness. Snow blanketed rooftops and sidewalks, muffling sounds and creating a serene atmosphere. Walter spent most of his days indoors now, sitting by the window with a warm cup of tea. But even in the cold, he wasn't alone. The teens visited often, stomping snow off their boots before stepping inside to chat or help with small tasks. They brought him books from the library, puzzles to solve, and sometimes even homework they wanted him to check. Walter enjoyed these visits immensely, finding comfort in their laughter and energy. One snowy afternoon, Jake arrived carrying a stack of old photo albums he had borrowed from Walter weeks earlier. "I finished looking through them," he said, setting them down on the table. "These pictures are amazing, Mr. Walter. Your stories really come alive when I see them." Walter smiled, pleased that someone appreciated his memories so deeply. Together they flipped through the pages, reliving moments frozen in time. Walter in his uniform, standing tall with his comrades, candid shots of soldiers sharing meals or playing cards, and faded images of distant lands where battles had been fought. As they talked, Jake asked a question that lingered in his mind. "Do you ever regret joining the Marines? I mean, it must have been so hard." Walter leaned back in his chair, considering the thought carefully. "There were tough times, no doubt," he admitted, "but I don't regret it. Being part of something bigger than myself gave my life meaning. And knowing I helped protect people, it's a feeling you can't put into words." That conversation stayed with Jake long after he left Walter's house. It made him think about his own future and what kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind. Inspired by Walter's example, he started volunteering at a local shelter, helping serve meals to those in need. When Walter heard about this, he beamed with pride. "You're already making a difference," he told Jake during their next visit. "That's all any of us can hope for, to make the world a little better because we were here." The bond between Walter and the teens continued to grow, extending beyond casual visits. They began celebrating holidays together, marking each occasion with shared traditions. On New Year's Eve, they gathered at Mrs. Thompson's house for a cozy dinner, complete with sparkling cider and homemade desserts. As midnight approached, they counted down the seconds, cheering loudly as fireworks lit up the night sky. Walter watched the display with a contented smile, feeling grateful for the family he had found in these young people. By spring, the snow melted away, revealing green shoots poking through the soil. Life on Maple Street felt renewed, mirroring the blossoming trees and blooming flowers. Walter's health, however, showed signs of decline. He grew tired more easily and relied increasingly on his cane to move around. Yet his spirit remained unshaken. The teens noticed the change but didn't let it dampen their enthusiasm. Instead, they rallied around him, ensuring he was never without company or assistance. One sunny morning, Jake and a few others decided to surprise Walter with a project they had been working on secretly. They transformed his backyard into a peaceful garden, planting colorful flowers and installing a bench beneath a shade tree. When Walter stepped outside to see the results, his eyes widened in astonishment. "This is incredible," he murmured, running his hand over the smooth wood of the bench. "Thank you, all of you." The teens grinned, proud of their effort. For Walter, the garden became a favorite spot to sit and reflect, surrounded by beauty and reminders of the friendships he cherished. As summer approached, the neighborhood prepared for its annual 4th of July celebration. This year, the event took on special significance, as everyone agreed to dedicate it to Walter. A banner hung across the park entrance read, "Honoring our hero. Thank you, Walter." Families decorated picnic tables with red, white, and blue tablecloths, while children ran around waving tiny flags. James, the Marine sergeant, returned to give another heartfelt speech, highlighting Walter's contributions not just as a veteran but as a pillar of the community. When it was Walter's turn to speak, he stood slowly, leaning on his cane. The crowd fell silent, hanging on to every word. "I've lived a long life," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion welling inside him. "And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. We're all connected. Every act of kindness matters. Every moment of understanding brings us closer together. You've shown me that, and I'll carry that lesson with me always." His words echoed through the park, met with applause and tears. Later that evening, as fireworks exploded overhead, Walter sat surrounded by those who loved him. Jake handed him a blanket to ward off the evening chill, while others shared snacks and stories. For Walter, it was a perfect ending to a journey he hadn't anticipated, a journey of rediscovery, connection, and purpose. He realized that his story wasn't just about the past, it was also about the present and the future he had helped shape. In the months that followed, Walter's presence on the street became less frequent, but his influence remained strong. The teens carried forward the lessons he had taught them, spreading kindness wherever they went. Jake graduated high school with honors, crediting Walter's guidance for helping him stay focused. Others pursued paths inspired by the values Walter embodied: compassion, resilience, and service. Though Walter eventually passed away peacefully in his sleep, his legacy endured. The garden he loved became a memorial, with a plaque bearing his name and rank. Walter, U.S. Marine Corps veteran, a true hero. Neighbors continued to gather there, sharing stories and keeping his memory alive. Maple Street remained a place of unity and respect, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the enduring impact of one man's courage. For those who knew him, Walter would always be more than a veteran or a neighbor. He was a teacher, a friend, and a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in difficult times humanity has the capacity to heal, grow, and shine. And as long as his story was told, his spirit would continue to inspire generations to come.